Welcome back to Blacklit Memory. Tonight, we walk the ridgelines where graves tilt with time, where fog clings to stone like breath, and where every name carved in granite feels unfinished. These 8 stories rise from the hills of Appalachia, not from legend, but from what was left behind. From sealed ledgers, from clawed doors, from the places locals stopped naming once dusk falls. Some who came back swore they'd never return. Others never left at all. If these stories echo something you've heard before, or wish you hadn't, subscribe, drop a comment, and let us know where you're listening from. Now hush, draw the curtain, and listen close. I spent that morning sweeping the pine needles off the porch and sealing up the window frames with thick tape. The mountain wind had already turned sharp, carrying the early signs of frost, and I didn't want any draft sneaking into the cabin. It was a small place, tucked against the eastern slope, maybe 20 minutes up a dirt trail from the main road. I'd been living there alone for just over a month. My name's Lena. I had just turned 32 when I left the city for good. Packing up my apartment in a blur of taped-up boxes and donated furniture, I came back to the mountains because I wanted something simpler. My mother grew up in this region, a quiet, forested part of the Central Highlands, and though she rarely spoke of it, I remembered her warning me, once, about the white graves at the top of the ridge. She said the villagers never went up there, not unless they had to, and even then, they never stayed past sundown. I hadn't thought of that story in years, not until a week after moving in, when I was settling into the quiet. Most evenings I'd light a single oil lamp, boil some tea, and read beside the hearth. But one night, as I sat down with a book, I heard a gentle tapping on the glass behind me. Not knocking exactly, more like the sound of a fingernail brushing the pane. I turned, slowly. The window looked out toward the woods, maybe 10 feet between the wall and the first tree trunks. There was no one there. I told myself it was a twig or an animal brushing past, but I didn't read any more that night. I just sat still, holding the book open, waiting for another sound. A few days later, I started noticing a faint glow in the distance. It came from the mountain ridge, just past the tree line where the trail bent upward, a soft, shifting light, like someone carrying a lantern. At first, I thought maybe it was a hunter or someone from the village, though the slope was too steep for regular foot traffic. But the light moved in strange patterns. It weaved in and out of view like someone pacing between stones, never straying far from the ridge. By the third night, I couldn't sleep through it. Around 2 in the morning, I woke up to the sound of footsteps crunching on gravel. They echoed up the trail behind my cabin, slow and deliberate, not running, not lost, just walking. There was never a knock, never a voice, only the steps, pausing sometimes right near the porch, then continuing upward toward the ridge. One morning, I stepped outside and found a trail of gray powder lining the floorboards. It stretched across the front deck and into the hallway, a thin scatter of ash, like someone had carried it in their hands and let it slip between their fingers. That was when I started locking the doors during the day, too. The air felt colder even when the sun was out, and the sky, always overcast, made it hard to tell what time it was without checking a clock. Then the storms rolled in. Heavy fog swallowed the hillside, and the road back to the village was all but impassable. The wind howled like something desperate, and the signal on my phone vanished for days. I had food, water, wood, do enough to stay put, but I didn't like the feeling of being trapped. So that night, when the light appeared again on the ridge, stronger than ever, I made a decision. I bundled myself in my thickest coat, strapped a flashlight to my wrist, and started climbing the path behind the cabin. The mud slipped under my boots, but I kept going, following the dim flicker ahead like a lure on a line. Trees thinned out the higher I climbed. By the time I reached the ridge, the fog had thinned enough for me to see them. Rows of white headstones stretched out along the crest, scattered like bones under the moonlight. And there in the middle of them, stood a figure, pale as frost, still as stone, facing me. I stopped breathing. I tried to speak, but the wind tore the words from my throat. The figure didn't move. Its face was blurred by distance and shadow, but its gaze held mine like a weight pressing down. Then, it lifted one arm, slowly, like it was calling me forward. I looked down. My own hand was rising, trembling, matching the gesture. And I realized I couldn't move my feet, couldn't step back, couldn't even scream. I don't know how long I stood there. Seconds, maybe minutes. But something in me cracked. I wrenched my arm back to my side and stumbled away from the graves, turning so fast I nearly slipped on the wet stone. Rain had started falling, soft at first, but it picked up quick, becoming a steady sheet that soaked my coat and ran down my neck. I half ran, half slid down the path, heart thudding so loud it felt like thunder in my chest. My boots skidded over moss and mud, and the wind roared around me like it wanted to drown out my thoughts. The fog was thicker on the way down. The flashlight beam bounced uselessly off the white curtain of mist. I had no sense of direction anymore, just the desperate need to get back. I remembered something my uncle once taught me as a kid. Mark your trail. I started dragging my hand along trees, breaking twigs, placing little rocks where I could. Anything to give myself a way back if I had to double around. But after 10 minutes, I realized I had circled the same dead tree twice, the one with a scar down its bark like a burn. I cursed under my breath and kept moving. I didn't dare stop long enough to think. Eventually, I found a small stone structure tucked behind a thicket. It looked older than the cabin, maybe built by the villagers long ago. A family crypt, maybe. Low ceiling, just enough shelter to crawl inside and stay dry. I hesitated at the threshold, staring into the dark. But the rain was coming down hard, and my hands were already numb. I ducked inside and sat against the far wall, pulling my knees to my chest. For the first time since the climb, I let myself breathe. Nothing moved out there. No lights, no footsteps, just the rhythm of rain and wind on stone. I told myself it was over. Maybe it had all been in my head. Maybe I was just tired. And the storm had warped the light, made shadows into people. My eyelids grew heavy. I don't remember falling asleep, but I remember waking up. The pressure on my chest was the first thing. Heavy, cold, like a slab of stone had settled on me in the night. I opened my eyes and saw nothing but black above me, but I knew I wasn't alone. Something is pressing down, slowly, like it's testing how much weight I can take. I can't move my arms. My breath catches, and I feel it. Cold air, not mine, a sharp exhale brushing the back of my neck. I turn my head, just barely. There is a hand reaching from the dark, pale, thin, fingertips inches from my collar. I lurch forward. My body scrapes against the stone floor as I twist away. I throw an elbow behind me, make contact with something soft, and it recoils. I don't look back. I crawl out of the crypt and into the wet grass. The fog has thickened again, but I run anyway, branches slapping my face, thorns tearing at my sleeves. I don't stop until I see the faint shape of the cabin's roof in the distance. The sky is still dark, but the outline is there, real, is familiar. I don't remember unlocking the door. I just know I got inside, slammed it shut, and dropped to the floor. I stayed there until morning. When I finally stood up, my legs shook so bad I had to lean against the counter. I went to the window, wiped away the condensation. That's when I saw it. Right there, etched into the fogged-up glass. A mark. Small, sharp. It looked like a grave. Just a simple cross, sitting on a flat base, carved by a fingertip. I packed what I could carry and left that same morning. I didn't look back at the mountain. I didn't stop to tell anyone in the village. But sometimes, when I close my eyes, I still see the pale figure standing between the headstones, watching, waiting, just beyond the reach of the fog. When I stepped inside the cabin that afternoon, there was something waiting for me on the doorstep. A small headstone, no bigger than a shoebox, made of lead. I don't remember buying it. I don't remember photographing it either, which was strange, considering what I do for a living. My name is Jacob, 28, and I travel to forgotten graveyards and overgrown burial sites, documenting them through photography and research. I catalog everything I find, from old inscriptions to crumbling mausoleums. But this headstone wasn't in any of my notes. The inscription was worn but legible. Eli Hollister, 1892 to 1922. No location. No epitaph. Just the name and dates. I turned the stone over in my hands. It was heavy, unnaturally so for its size, and cold enough to sting my skin. But what unsettled me more was the silence outside. The woods behind the cabin were usually alive with the buzz of insects and the rustle of leaves. That day, it felt like everything had stopped breathing. No birds, no wind, just that gray slab resting in my hands. I set it on a side table and tried to forget it. Told myself it must have been a mistake, something left behind by a collector or another traveler. But later that evening, curiosity got the better of me. I pulled out an old topographic map I kept folded in my gear bag and started scanning the nearby hills. That's when I saw it. Hollow. A small village name, printed in faded script. 5 miles southeast, tucked into a valley I hadn't explored yet. Something about it rang a bell. I flipped through one of my field guides and found a passing mention of a Hollister family crypt at the edge of Hollow, dated early 1900s. No detailed records, just a footnote and a hand-drawn symbol of a grave. That night, I couldn't sleep. I set up my camera at the window, just in case something moved out there. Around midnight, I checked the photos. One of the frames had a blur in it, faint, like fog or light distortion, but the shape was human, slender, mid-step, caught between two trees. I hadn't seen anyone pass by. The next night, I heard it, a voice, soft as paper sliding against wood. Jacob, just one word, whispered from the porch. When I opened the door, there was nothing there. I started digging deeper, found a local library in town, barely used anymore. Dust on the shelves, most of the records yellow with age. But tucked between pages of an old church ledger was a note scribbled in the margins. Hollister, burial 1922. Not official. Buried quiet. No ceremony. Forgotten soon after. I read it 3 times. Buried quiet. Forgotten. That stuck with me. A few evenings later, I packed a flashlight, my camera, and the map, and set out just before sunset. I followed the old path east, down a slope and across a narrow stream. The trail turned to gravel, then to nothing, just soft dirt and the crunch of leaves under my boots. By the time I reached the edge of Hollow, the sun had dipped below the ridge. The sky was still glowing, but the light was thin and dying. The graveyard came into view suddenly. No gate, no fence, just a clearing choked with ivy and crooked stones. Most of the markers were cracked or moss-covered, all except one. A clean slab, new, right in the center. My feet stopped cold. It said Jacob. They were done for the 7, just that. My name. Same font, same size as the one on the lead stone. The wind rose sharply, scattering leaves across the grass. I felt something shift under my feet, a soft tremor, like the ground had exhaled. I stepped back. My hand reached for the flashlight, but I never turned it on. Somewhere in the trees, a voice whispered again, "Stay forever." It not. And then I saw it. A shadow stepped forward from behind the thicket. No face, just the outline of a man, barely solid, like fog trapped in human form. It moved toward me, slow, certain, and I could not move. I forced my legs to move. One step, then another. The weight of that thing's gaze followed me as I turned and ran, crashing through low branches and half-buried stones. The trail was gone. All I saw were trees, fog, and shapes that might have been gravestones or just shadows playing tricks. I fumbled for the flashlight in my jacket and flipped the switch. It blinked once, then went dark. My heart dropped. I smacked it against my palm, but the battery had given up. I was alone in a maze of graves with no path and no light. I tried to retrace my steps, using memory and instinct, but everything looked the same. The more I moved, the more twisted the land felt beneath my feet. The graves were too close together now, almost like they had shifted. Then I remembered something I read in that library book. A line scribbled in the margin: "Never linger after dusk in the Hollister ground. If you do not turn back before dark, you stay." It had sounded like folklore, a warning dressed up as myth, but now it felt like a rule I had broken without knowing. I stumbled into a clearing and found shelter. A small, covered structure, maybe once a shed, maybe a storage vault for tools. Its roof still held out the rain. I ducked inside, panting, heart pounding against my ribs like it wanted out. For a moment, the woods fell quiet again. The wind died down. The air warmed slightly, just enough to trick me into thinking I was safe. I sat with my back to the wall, soaked and shaking, and closed my eyes. I told myself I'd rest for a moment, just enough to breathe. But at some point, I slipped into sleep. I woke to the feeling of weight shifting beside me. The air had turned cold again, sharp enough to sting the tips of my fingers. I opened my eyes slowly. No one was there. The space beside me was empty. But I felt it. A pressure. A presence. The undeniable knowledge that someone was sitting inches from my shoulder. And then I felt it. A hand. Cold. Slipping under the sleeve of my coat. I freeze. My lungs lock up. I twist. And the flashlight rolls against my foot. I grab it and flick the switch again. The beam stutters to life just long enough to sweep across the wall. That is when I see it. A face. Inches from mine. Blurred. Gray. Its eyes empty like glass jars filled with ash. I scream and scramble to my feet, kicking the wall behind me as I bolt outside. Rain pours down again, heavy, like it had been waiting for me. Each step lands with a splash, my boots pounding through mud and water. The graves close in around me. The stones are taller now, the space between them tighter. I don't look back. I run, harder than I ever have. My shoulder clips a crooked marker. My hand scrapes bark, but I keep moving. Somewhere ahead, a shape shifts. Not a ghost, not a person, a gap, a break in the stones. I push through it, gasping, stumbling toward what I pray is the trail. And then I see the trees start to thin. The air clears. The fog lightens just enough for me to spot the faint glint of my cabin roof, barely visible in the distance. I do not stop. I do not breathe until I slam the door behind me. I lock it. Twice. The next morning, I packed everything I owned and left Hollow behind. I drove back to the city without looking at a single map. But a week later, the lead stone reappeared, right on the windowsill in my apartment. I never heard anyone come in. The door had been locked. Worse still, my camera stopped working. Not broken, but useless. It would only take blank white shots. No people, no shadows, nothing but silence. And each night now, just before sleep, I hear it again. A whisper from the corner of the room. Jacob. It comes from the direction of the shelf, where the stone sits. It started just before dawn. I was lying in bed, half asleep, when I heard laughter drifting through the open window. A child's voice, soft and high, echoing across the fog-covered hill behind the house. I couldn't tell where it came from exactly. It was everywhere and nowhere at once. My name is Marla. I was 25 when I returned to my hometown, a quiet mountain village I had not seen since I was a child. My mother had passed only weeks before, and I came back to settle her affairs and clean the old family graves up on the hill. The cemetery had long since been abandoned, overgrown with moss and lichen. I remembered something my mother used to say, always in a low whisper when I was little. Never go to the cemetery at night. If you do, the dead children will call your name. Back then I thought she was just trying to scare me. But that first morning, hearing the laughter, something inside me stirred. It didn't sound playful. It sounded like waiting. The next few nights, the same thing happened. Just as the fog crept low across the grass, the laughter would return. Always distant, always right on the edge of being real. One morning, I stepped outside and found footprints in the moss-covered earth. Small, delicate. They led from the direction of my mother's grave and disappeared into the woods behind the house. I followed them for a few yards, but the trail faded. The prints weren't deep enough to last, like they had been made by something lighter than a real child. That night, I saw eyes in the trees. Not glowing, not red, just faint reflections, like glass marbles catching the porch light. They vanished when I blinked, but I knew what I had seen. Later, when I stood at the mirror to brush my hair, something felt wrong. At first, I couldn't say what it was, but then I saw it. A shape behind me, small and still. I spun around. Nothing there. The mirror rippled, not like a wave, but like the reflection was out of sync with the room, just slightly delayed, like it was showing something that had happened a second ago. The rain came that week, cold, slow, and constant. Wind hissed through the cracks in the window frames, and every sound in the house seemed to stretch. Doors groaned longer, floorboards sighed deeper. The mirror grew misty even when I wasn't near it. Then came the voice. Marla, one word, right beside my ear, even though I was alone in my room. I jumped up and turned on the light. Nothing. The hallway beyond my door was dark, but I saw something move. A faint swish of white fabric, like a skirt being pulled around a corner. Then footsteps, bare, soft, slowly crossing the hallway floor. I grabbed the handle to my bedroom door, heart pounding, and pulled. It did not open. I yanked harder. It rattled. Tack stuck. Locked from the outside. I slammed my fist against the wood and shouted. No answer. Behind me, I swear I heard another whisper. Breathless. Just laughter. Closer this time. And then, silence. I pounded the door until my hands ached. The wood vibrated under each blow, but it would not give. My own breathing filled the room, quick and uneven. Finally, with one last shove, the latch gave way and the door swung open. I ran into the hallway, barefoot, the boards icy beneath me. The house was dark except for a faint gray glow seeping through the windows. Rain hissed outside like static, blurring everything beyond the glass. I did not stop to look for the shadow. I just ran. The back door creaked open with a long moan. I burst into the yard and out toward the cemetery on the hill. Fog swirled around my legs, cold as a wet sheet, and I felt the small footprints almost guiding me forward. My phone flashlight cut a thin path through the mist as I stumbled toward the old stones. I found myself following the same moss-covered trail I had seen in daylight. This time it seemed more distinct, a winding path of pressed-down grass that curved between crooked headstones. I hoped it would lead me somewhere safe, though the trees felt like they were closing in. At last, the family plot appeared. My mother's headstone rose from the earth like a pale island in the sea of mist. I dropped to my knees beside it, clutching the stone with both hands. My chest heaved, and tears came without warning. I whispered her name, hoping for some sense of comfort. The cemetery was still. Even the rain had softened to a mist. Around me, the fog glowed faintly pink, as though the last traces of dawn were caught in it. For a moment, I thought I was safe. Then a small hand clamped down on my shoulder. Cold, small, unmistakable. I turn my head slowly. The breath catches in my throat. The child is there. It leans close, its face level with mine. Its breath spills across the back of my neck, icy and sour. The mouth is open in a grin that shows no teeth. No sound, just a hollow expression where laughter should be. I fumble for my phone and flick the flashlight on. The beam slices through the fog and lands on its face. For a heartbeat, the mist peels back like torn fabric. Its eyes are empty, its skin pale as wax. The smile never moves. I wrench free, falling backward into the wet grass. Stones scrape my arms as I scramble to my feet. I run. My foot hits a loose slab of rock and it topples, crashing against my ankle. Pain shoots up my leg, but I do not stop. I drag myself forward, half crawling, half running, the fog clawing at my clothes. I know if I stay here, it will take me. Somehow, the trees begin to thin. The outlines of the house emerge through the mist. My breath is ragged, but I keep going until I reach the back steps and collapse against the door. I do not remember unlocking it. I only remember waking hours later on the floor, my ankle swollen, the fog outside gone. That night, the laughter returned, softer now, as though it was waiting just beyond the window. When the rain came again, small footprints appeared faintly on my kitchen floor, as if something had walked in while I slept. Sometimes in dreams, my mother visits me, standing by the headstone as she always did. But behind her, there is always another shape, small, still, waiting. We reached the edge of Deep Hollow just after noon. The trail was barely visible, overgrown with roots and worn smooth by time. Mist hugged the ground like something alive, curling between tree trunks that rose high and nodded overhead, sealing us in with shadows. Jacob adjusted his gear behind me, the soft click of thermal sensors cutting through the stillness. He was my younger brother, Jacob, 27, smart, stubborn, a technician with an eye for readings I could never make sense of. I was 30, used to being the one who led. But out here in the hollow, the trees felt older than authority. We had taken this trip on a tip from a local man who spoke in low tones about an old cemetery that didn't show up on maps anymore. We weren't ghost hunters or thrill seekers. I worked in topography surveys, and Jacob specialized in thermal imaging for environmental studies. The man had insisted the ground shifted up there, that graves sank and rose again. He told us not to go after dark. It wasn't the warning that got to me. It was the way he said it, like he'd been up there and heard something he shouldn't have. We climbed anyway, lugging packs full of scanners, sensors, and one camping tent we hoped we wouldn't need for long. By the time we reached the gate, nothing more than 2 stone pillars lost among underbrush. The sun was nearly gone. The cemetery stretched into the fog. Headstones leaned in like teeth, weather-worn and almost swallowed by ivy. We didn't speak much once we passed the threshold. The air was different here, wet, heavy, and strangely cold in bursts, like breathing in next to a block of ice. At first I thought I imagined it, a faint exhale behind the stones, low and slow, like someone bracing against pain. Jacob stopped walking at the same moment. His hand went to his thermal scanner. "There's a cold pocket," he said. "Big one. Right there. That is a process pays into the grade now." I squinted into the mist where he pointed. The scanner's screen flickered, bright orange and red. Then suddenly a patch of blue, the kind of blue that meant something was draining heat unnaturally fast. "Could be a sinkhole," I offered. Jacob didn't answer. He just kept walking toward it. adjusting the sensitivity on the scanner. The readings kept shifting. It made no sense. We set up camp a few hundred feet from the denser grave clusters. The fog never fully lifted, even as we boiled water for noodles and logged the coordinates. It pressed in all night, and the wind moved strangely through the stones. Not like gusts, but narrow streams of air that sounded like breath escaping lips, some long, some quick. That night, Jacob barely slept. I heard him outside the tent at least twice, mumbling to himself as he checked the sensors. At one point, our laser projector flashed through the trees. He was trying to map out distances. The beam cut through the fog and scattered across the branches like veins of light. Then it passed across a headstone and caught something that looked like a shoulder moving behind it. I bolted upright. Jacob, what was that? When Kai back to our. He didn't answer right away, just stared toward the grave with his jaw tight. Could be a deer, he said finally. But it hadn't moved like a deer. It stood upright. I saw it for less than a second, but it had the shape of someone stepping sideways to avoid the beam. By the third night, the fog was thicker than before. We couldn't even see the trail back down. The GPS kept flickering. Signal lost. Then found. Then gone again. I told Jacob we should pack up early next morning. He didn't argue. But that night, something changed. I woke around 3 a.m. to silence. No wind, no breath. Just a stillness so sharp it pressed against my ears. Jacob's side of the tent was empty. I sat up, heart pounding, and unzipped the flap. He was out there, standing dead still among the graves, maybe 20 feet away, facing the tent. His face was pale in the moonlight. He wasn't moving. Jacob, I called. My voice cracked. He didn't respond. I stepped out barefoot, cold biting my feet, and moved toward him. Jacob, come on, man. Say something. It's Wannet. The fog shifted. Something behind him flickered, like a ripple. And then, suddenly, a hand reached out, pale and blurry like a heat mirage, and made a slow grab toward my wrist. I jumped back. The hand vanished. Jacob didn't move. His eyes locked on mine. They were open wide, too wide, and empty. I ran, straight out of the tent, stumbling over roots and broken stone, flashlight jerking wild in my hand. The cold slapped my face, and the mist swallowed everything. I didn't look back to see if he followed. I just kept moving toward where I thought the trail might be. The flashlight beam jittered across cracked headstones and tangled brush. My breath came in bursts, too loud in my ears. Every few seconds, I stopped to call his name. Jacob. My voice sounded smaller than it should have, like the fog was thinning it out on purpose. There was no answer, just the echo of it, bouncing back off marble slabs and crooked trees. I dug out the rescue whistle from my pocket and blew it hard. The shrill sound pierced the quiet and bounced through the cemetery like it was ricocheting between ribs. For a moment, I thought I heard movement, a shuffle near the edge of my light. I spun toward it, nearly slipping. Nothing there, just an open grave with no marker. Its earth too dry for the weather. Then I heard it. Rowan, his voice, distant but clear. Coming from deeper in? I froze. Every instinct screamed to run the other way, but I couldn't, not when it sounded so close. I moved toward it, stepping over fallen branches and sinking into patches of damp soil. Jacob, I called. Keep talking. He see then, we in session. Here, he said. The voice led me to a roofed grave structure, half sunken and overgrown with moss. A few stone steps led down into a covered hollow. I hesitated, heart pounding, then ducked inside. The fog didn't follow me in. It was darker here. The air had a stale, earthy smell, like something long buried. I called his name again, but got no answer this time, just the sound of my own breath. I sat for a moment. My legs shook and my lungs burned. It felt like safety, like maybe he had wandered and come back and everything would make sense in the morning. I leaned back against the cold stone wall and closed my eyes for a second. Then I felt it. A sudden chill pressed against my side. I looked down. Jacob was lying beside me, unmoving, his skin pale, lips slightly parted, eyes barely open. But it wasn't the sight of him that made my stomach turn. It was the smell. Damp, like earth soaked in old things, things that had been still for too long. His hand reached up and grabbed my wrist. I flinched. The grip was strong, ice cold. I pulled back, but his fingers tightened. Jacob, let go. There, Frank, the centuries. He does not respond. His body jerks once, like a puppet on strings. Then he lunges up. His teeth snap an inch from my face. I scream and twist away, but he catches my sleeve in his mouth. His hands grab for my jacket, pulling me back toward the shadows. I kick and claw, feet scrambling on the stone floor. My flashlight hits the ground and rolls away, casting wild beams against the walls. I feel his breath on my neck, cold and wrong. It smells like wet roots. He does not speak, just growls low, like something caught between a breath and a sob. My hand finds the flashlight. I swing it up, smash it into his arm. He jerks back. I scramble to my feet and run, up the steps, back into the fog. I do not look behind me. The graves blur past. I follow the slope upward, praying it leads out. Every few seconds I hear something steps behind me. Close, then gone, then close again. Branches claw at my face. My lungs burn. I run until I see the break in the trees. And I don't stop running until I am back at the base of the trail, covered in sweat, cuts, and soil. Alone. They never found him. The search lasted 5 days. Dogs, drones, volunteers, but nothing turned up. Just our tent, just our gear, not a single trace of Jacob. I went back to the city, but sometimes, late at night, I wake up to the sound of someone walking slowly around my apartment, pausing at the corners, breathing, quiet and steady, just like the sound we first heard between the stones. I found it folded inside my grandmother's will. A map, hand-drawn and yellowed. It creased so many times it had nearly split in half. In the corner was a note carved in her shaky handwriting, etched hard into the paper, like she had written it in a panic. Find the footprint on the forgotten grave. My name is Elias. I was 34 then, taking time off from work to trace family roots and figure out what parts of the old house and older stories were true. My grandmother had passed that spring, quietly in her sleep, leaving behind boxes of books, letters, and that strange little map. It led to a patch of overgrown hillside just a few miles outside town, a place none of the locals seemed eager to talk about. The morning I followed it, the sky was low and gray. Birds moved quiet in the trees, and the grass along the trail was knee-high, hiding broken stones and half-swallowed markers. It didn't look like a cemetery anymore, more like a place that had forgotten it ever was one. Still, I found it. A single footprint, pressed deep into the top of a moss-covered gravestone. It was large, human, but wrong somehow. Too long at the heel, too shallow at the toes. The stone around it was dry, but the print looked fresh. I crouched to touch it. The stone felt warm, not from the sun, which hadn't come out all day, but from something else. I dusted off the surface, checked around for any sign of who might have stepped there. There were no trails in the moss, no other footprints in sight. Just to be sure, I pulled a stick of white chalk from my bag and outlined the print. A habit from field work. Mark what you find. Record it. That night, I made camp near the edge of the grave field, thinking I'd photograph it again in morning light. But when I returned, the chalk was gone. Not faded. Not washed off. Gone. The footprint was still there, sharp as ever. I stared at it for a long time, trying to reason through what could have happened. I paced the area, 10 steps forward, then back. That was when I noticed them. More prints. Fresh ones. They trailed behind me. Everywhere I walked, a second set of footprints appeared, perfectly spaced behind mine. I stopped. So did they. I turned fast, but the space behind me was empty. There was no one. I moved again, slower this time. Each step I took, something mirrored it, just one step behind. No sound, no breath. But I felt it, that closeness, that presence just outside the edge of vision. By evening, I had circled the graveyard twice, hoping to spot a pattern. The fog drifted in thin ribbons through the trees, and every shadow looked too tall, too still. When the wind picked up, it carried the dry rustle of leaves across the stones. They skittered like footsteps. I stayed by the fire that night, eyes locked on the trail I had made. I thought if I kept it in view, nothing could sneak up. But the dark played tricks. I saw movement in the spaces between gravestones, figures too low or too thin to be people. The wind twisted around the hill, and in it, the silhouette of what looked like feet moving beneath the trees. I told myself it was branches, just wind, just old bones of forest creaking. But the prints were still there, and new ones had formed while I slept. That evening, I climbed the steps of the old stone platform on the edge of the hill. I wanted height, a better view. From there, I looked out over the field and saw them. Dozens of footprints, spaced evenly, fanning out from the grave with the first mark. They spread in every direction, some leading toward the woods, others circling the platform where I stood. I backed away slowly, heart thudding. The wind fell still. Then the scream came. It tore through the night like something being ripped apart from the inside. A voice, raw and ragged, rising up from between the graves. My legs locked. I hear the sound again now as I tell you, like something splitting at the seams. I turned toward the tree line and saw it, a figure, running full tilt through the graves, arms pumping, head low. It shot out from the mist without warning. I step back. My foot hits the edge of the stone platform. The figure charges. I fall against a headstone, hand slipping on wet moss. My heart pounds as I brace for impact. But just before it reaches me, the shape swerves, veers sideways, disappears into the dark. Gone. And I was left staring into the trees, breath caught in my throat. I ran without a plan, just straight into the woods, feet slapping against wet leaves, heart punching against my ribs. The trees thinned, then thickened again, roots clawing up from the ground like they were trying to trip me. I looked back once and saw nothing, but it felt like something was inches behind, matching my breath. Rain started falling, not heavy, but steady enough to make the trail slick and the air thick with the smell of soil and old bark. I slipped twice, palms scraping against rocks, fingers digging into roots to keep balance. The slope steepened ahead, and I pushed upward, climbing with both hands, wet dirt smearing across my jacket. I followed the newest set of prints I could see, hoping they would lead somewhere away from whatever had been chasing me. But the deeper I went, the stranger they looked. They twisted, overlapping, sometimes smaller than before, sometimes impossibly wide, like the ground could not make up its mind what was following me. Lightning flashed. For a second, the whole forest lit up white. I saw no figure, but the branches swayed as if someone had just passed between them. I pressed forward until I found it a wide stone outcrop, just high enough to crawl beneath. The overhang gave some shelter from the rain. I backed against the wall, legs pulled to my chest, trying to stay quiet. The forest sounded wrong. Too quiet now. Even the rain hitting leaves above felt muffled, like I had stepped inside something sealed. I listened for movement. Nothing came. I waited. I do not remember falling asleep, but I must have. When I opened my eyes, it was still dark. I lay still, disoriented. Then I noticed it. A rustle, not wind. A shift of fabric. Then, pressure. Someone is stepping over me. Carefully. Slowly. Their weight dips onto my coat. The breath catches in my throat. I feel the air move above my cheek, warm and slow. Then something touches my heel. A bare foot. Ice cold. Soft. I jolt upright. My head hits the stone. Pain shoots down my spine. I fumble for the flashlight, hands shaking. It clicks on. The beam slices through the cave. There. A shape crouching just inside the overhang. 2 hands stretched toward me, fingers open. I scream, scramble to my feet. The figure lunges. I twist past it, slip once, then catch myself and start up the slope. My boots slam rock and mud. Behind me, something crashes against stone and grunts low. Inhuman. I do not stop. Branches claw my face. My breath wheezes out in sharp bursts. I crest the hill, see the faint glimmer of the trail, and throw myself forward. Only once do I look back. A shadow at the bottom of the slope, frozen, watching. I do not see its face, only the way its shoulders rise and fall like it is trying to remember how to breathe. By the time morning light broke, I was back near the grave field. The rock overhang was empty, but something was wrong. On the stone floor, where I had slept, was a single footprint. Small, clear, deeply pressed into solid rock, the kind of rock that should not hold any print. My grandmother's map was gone. So was the old letter with the etched warning. Nothing left in my bag except damp clothes and the echo of last night still thudding in my head. Since then, I dream of footsteps. Always soft. Always slow. Just behind me. Somewhere in the trees. Do not visit the warden's grave after dark, the old man said. His voice carried strangely through the mountain wind, as if it had weight to it. We were standing outside the village tea stall when I asked about the cemetery. He didn't look at me when he spoke, just stared past my shoulder toward the ridge. My name is Serena. I was 29 at the time, a researcher in folk traditions and oral beliefs, traveling through highland provinces for my fieldwork. The villagers had mentioned the warden's grave before, always in a half-mumbled way, like someone remembering a dream they were trying to forget. I was too curious to let it go. They said the warden was not buried like the others, that he had once been in charge of watching the old dead, making sure nothing disturbed them. Some claimed he had been buried alive as a final act of protection. Others said he walked the paths even now, keeping names secret and souls trapped. The cemetery was beautiful in daylight, sloped across the southern hill, shaded by tall pine and framed by wildflowers that grew unchecked. I walked its paths with a notebook in hand, recording symbols and carvings. But even in full sun, the old man's warning hung behind every step I took. Some graves had no names at all. The stone markers were worn smooth, or worse, deliberately scraped clean. I found strange markings etched instead, patterns of eyes, open palms, and shapes that reminded me of sleeping figures. A kind of code, maybe, or just superstition taken too far. Toward the center, tucked behind a low stone wall, I found a staircase. It led down into a chamber, carved into the hill itself. The walls were rough but stable, and in the far corner stood a single monument larger than the others, with a wide stone base and a slender carved pillar above it. A figure had been etched into the pillar. It lay on its back, hands crossed, a stone cross pressed tight against its chest. Beneath it, no name, just more of those symbols. I sketched them, then left, before the light got too low. That night, back at the cabin I was renting nearby, I heard it. A slow step outside. Then another. Heavy, deliberate, like someone dragging something thick across gravel. I stood still, not daring to open the curtain. In the morning, I returned to the graveyard. I meant only to observe, to photograph. But the air felt different. The wind did not touch the stones. The grass no longer bent the same way. At the northern edge, I noticed something I had missed the day before. The gravestones there had shifted slightly, angled differently than before. I checked my notes. The changes were subtle, but real. Too real. I set up my camera to photograph the warden's grave. The stone seemed darker now, as if stained by moisture, though the air was dry. I focused the lens, and then I saw him. A tall figure, standing just behind the pillar, head bowed, arms crossed over the stone cross like he was holding it in place. He did not move, not even when I gasped and dropped the camera. The flashlight clipped to my bag rolled forward, beam slicing across the stone. The figure vanished. In its place, a sound, a voice, cracked and deep. Intruders pay the price. Thank you, Haven Das. It didn't echo. It slammed against me like a wave, sharp and final. I stood frozen, heart pounding, ears ringing. The gravestones did not move this time, but the space around me felt smaller, like the hill itself had drawn in a breath, waiting. I turned and ran. The path I had used just hours before was no longer visible. Fog rolled down the slope, thick and wet, turning trees into vague outlines and blotting out the trail completely. I called out once, just to hear my own voice. It sounded wrong, flat, like it had no place out here anymore. I clutched the flashlight and camera tight, using the beam to sweep left and right, looking for any familiar shape. Rocks jutted out like bones from the earth. I slipped twice on damp leaves, catching myself before I tumbled down the hill. Every gust of wind felt directed, purposeful, pushing me off course. Somewhere to my right, I heard a thud, then another. Trees swayed, but not with the wind. It sounded like something was being dropped, or dragged. My skin prickled with cold, not from the temperature, but from the feeling that I was no longer alone. I tried to calm myself, focus, use the light, make a signal. My fingers found the camera's flash, and I triggered it in bursts, hoping someone, anyone, would see. The flashes lit up the fog in quick pulses, revealing nothing but empty stone and wet branches. Eventually, I found the carved stone overhang I had seen before. A burial chamber, partly sunken, its roof still intact. I ducked under it, back pressed to the stone, flashlight resting beside me. Rain started to fall, light at first, then steady. I waited, listening. The fog thinned, and the wind died. The quiet crept in slowly, heavy and complete. I let my eyes close for just a moment, telling myself the worst had passed. When I woke, I wasn't sure how long I had been out. The flashlight still flickered beside me. I picked up the camera, hoping to distract myself, to see what I had captured. But every photo came up black, not out of focus, not underexposed, just nothing, as if the camera had recorded absence. Then the screen began to blink. Static, then black, then a shape, a face, close to the lens, unmoving, watching. I lower the camera. He is right in front of me. The warden. His face is pale stone, lips unmoving. His eyes do not blink. He raises one hand, slow and deliberate, holding the same stone cross from the carving. His arm stretches toward me, the cross pointed like a blade. I throw myself sideways, out of the overhang, into the rain and mud. I do not look back. The path is narrow, lined with gravestones that now tilt inward. Tree branches claw down, snatching at my jacket. I duck and weave through them, breath coming hard. Behind me, the sound of boots crunching stone. Vast, heavy. The trees thin. The hill drops away. I leap across the stone trench at the edge of the grave field. As I land, something rips loud behind me. My coat tears across the back. I feel the rush of air as the cross misses by inches. I do not stop running until I reach the village road. In the daylight, no one believes me. But a week later, I receive a package with no return address. Inside is a photograph. My camera's model, the warden's grave in the background. And me? Standing beside it, only I do not remember taking it. I was alone, or thought I was. Since then, I cannot sleep more than an hour at a time. Every dream ends the same. Cold hands, a towering shadow, and that cross, pressed gently against my forehead, like a warning that has not ended yet. The coffee was still hot in my hand when I saw it. Just a flicker. Movement behind the mist that clung to the cemetery ridge. I squinted toward the old headstones, their edges soft and gray in the morning haze. For half a second, I thought I saw a person standing among them. My name's Nolan. I was 35 back then, living alone in a rented cabin up near Cold Creek Ridge. I'd gone there to write a book on remote Appalachian settlements, places where time frayed and history hung loose in the air, like smoke. Most days, I'd get up before the sun, make a pot of strong coffee, and sit out on the porch, staring into the trees until the world sharpened back into focus. The Ridge Cemetery had always unsettled me. There was no church nearby, no clear path leading up, just a long line of crooked stones, half sunk in moss and roots, at the edge of the woods. Locals said no one had been buried there in a century, but the ground still looked disturbed, like something underneath kept shifting. A week before, I'd thought I saw someone watching me from up there. Not a shape, just a pair of eyes. Sharp, distant, fixed on me. But when I grabbed the binoculars and looked again, the place was empty. I'd laughed it off at the time, chalked it up to too much caffeine and not enough sleep. But that morning, I saw it again. Not just the eyes. A shimmer, like light catching on a lens, then the unmistakable glint of an eye peeking from behind a stone. It vanished the moment I focused. That's when the first chill ran down my spine. I didn't mention it to anyone. No one around to tell. Anyway, the nearest neighbor was 5 miles down the trail, and cell signal up here was spotty at best. So I set up a trail camera on a tripod and aimed it straight at the ridge. Motion triggered. Time to snap photos every 30 seconds from dusk till dawn. The next morning, I checked the footage. Most frames were empty. Just fog, stone, and trees shifting in wind. But around 2:47 a.m., there was something. A figure, tall, thin, caught mid-step between the graves. The body blurred, like it had moved just as the shutter clicked, but the face was sharp, staring straight toward my cabin. I tried to stay calm, told myself it could be a hiker, some night wanderer, maybe a hunter out early, though that didn't sit right either. What kind of hunter walks through a graveyard at 3 in the morning? That night, I couldn't sleep. Rain was coming in thick across the ridge. I kept the porch light on and listened for any sound out of place. Around midnight, I heard it. Soft, deliberate footfalls in the underbrush behind the cabin. Not a deer. Too slow, too careful. I stepped quietly to the back window, my heart thudding. Through the trees, I caught a flicker of movement, a small beam of light weaving between trunks. Not steady like a flashlight. It blinked off and on, like someone was hiding it but couldn't help letting it slip through. I stood frozen, waiting for it to pass. The rain hit hard that night. Trees shook. Soil slid down parts of the hill. By morning, the back road was washed out, and the only trail leading down was covered in fallen branches. I was stuck. I tried calling for help, but the storm had knocked out whatever signal I had left. I kept the doors locked after that, curtains drawn, slept with the hatchet I used for firewood by the bed. Each night, I'd hear something, twigs snapping too close, low breathing sounds carried on the wind, soft tapping on the walls that stopped the second I moved. Then came the glass. It was late, past 2. I was reading by lantern when I heard it. A sharp crack, followed by the soft hiss of air and rain. I turned, and there it was, my front window, shattered inward. A rock lay on the floor among shards of glass. I froze, heart hammering in my chest. Slowly, I stepped toward the porch and flipped the light. He was there, just beyond the reach of the light, no more than 10 feet away. A tall, dark figure standing motionless in the rain, his eyes locked on mine, his hand lifted, palm flat, like he was about to throw another stone, or reach in. I stepped back. He didn't move, just stood there in the downpour, staring, face blurred by mist, but unmistakably human. I didn't wait to see what came next. I didn't go for the front door. I spun around and sprinted to the back room, shoved open the bathroom window, and climbed out barefoot into the wet dark. The rain had softened the ground, turning the slope behind the cabin into slick mud. I slipped twice, palms scraping against wet roots, before I managed to crawl down the ridge far enough to catch my breath. Fog rolled in, thicker down low, coiling between the trees. I used the trail camera like a lantern, its LED screen flickering with stored images as I stumbled forward. Every few feet, I looked back. Nothing moved behind me, but that didn't mean he wasn't there. I didn't have a plan, just one thought repeating over and over. Get away from the cabin, away from the window, he broke. The eyes that found mine in the rain. I knew there used to be an old hunting shed somewhere near the northern bluff, maybe half a mile off the trail. I turned in that direction and kept going. I found it just before dawn. The shed leaned to one side like it was sinking into the earth, its roof patched with rusted sheet metal. Inside, the smell of mold and old oil hung thick in the air, but it was dry. I dropped to the floor with the camera still in my lap and finally let myself breathe. It was quiet, too quiet. I waited for the sound of feet, breaking branches, breath against the glass. Nothing came. I told myself he must have lost me in the fog. Maybe he had been bluffing. Maybe he was gone. My eyes started to close. I wrapped myself tighter in my jacket and drifted in and out, holding the camera like a weapon. I don't remember falling asleep. Just the moment I woke up again, and the light was no longer mine. The camera screen lit up on its own. Bright white filled the shed, flickering like a slow pulse. It shined directly into my face, making me squint. Then, slowly, it turned. The beam moved toward the shed's only door. I didn't move, didn't breathe, just watched as the light hit the crack under the door and caught the outline of feet, bare feet. A shadow shifted outside. I pressed my back to the far wall, gripping the camera tight enough to creak its plastic casing. The doorknob didn't turn, but something touched the door. Tap. Then again. Tap, tap. Delicate. Almost curious. Like someone knocking just to be sure I was still there. The breath came next. Heavy. Wet. I heard it misting against the pane of cracked glass in the top corner. Then fingers. Long. Thin. Pale. They slid slowly across the window. Too high to be natural. He was standing on something, watching me from above. I lunged for the back of the shed. The window there was smaller, nailed halfway shut. I pushed it with everything I had. It gave an inch, then another, and finally burst open with a crack of splintered wood. I dove through. The cold bit into me as I hit the ground hard and rolled. Behind me, I heard the shed door creak, not from the hinge, but from the weight of something leaning into it. Then, footsteps. Fast. Precise. Chasing. I didn't look back. I ran downhill, branches slapping my arms. feet sliding through mud and moss. I could hear him behind me, closer with every breath. The sound of his steps matched mine, beat for beat. Every time I staggered, I felt it. The shift in pressure, the weight of his presence right behind me. And then, just for a second, a hand. Cold fingers brushed my shoulder. I screamed and flung myself forward, rolling down the final slope toward the creek bed. I hit the stones, hard, and crawled into the underbrush, holding my breath. Silence. Only rain now. Only trees. By dawn, I found the old ranger trail and followed it out. When I looked back from the edge of the road, the ridge was still veiled in fog, the cemetery barely visible. But I felt it, eyes, still watching. Later that morning, I checked the camera. There were photos I didn't take. Shots of the cabin, of me, sleeping, and in the corner of one frame, behind the broken window, was a shadow standing inside the cabin. I was the only one there. I never went back to Cold Creek Ridge. But sometimes, when I dream, I see the cemetery again, and I wake with the feeling that something is watching, just beyond the glass. I came to the Appalachians with one purpose: to find the grave of my ancestor, the one rumored to have trafficked opium through the mountain paths long before the government ever set foot here. I didn't come to forgive him. I came to write a kind of apology, a reckoning in words, for what his choices had left behind. My name is Lila. I was 31 then, born in Ohio, raised on stories that always stopped short when they reached my great-great-grandfather. The branch of my family that stayed behind in the valley rarely spoke his name, but a faded old map, passed down through my mother, pointed to a tiny forest cemetery. That was where I needed to go. It wasn't marked on any GPS. I hiked in with the old map and a compass, all my pack full of notes, camera gear, and a worn leather notebook I'd promised myself I would fill. The woods were thick, heavy with vines and fallen trees. When I finally found the cemetery clearing, it didn't look abandoned. It looked like someone had just stepped away. The gravestones were moss-covered and crooked, some carved in German, others plain English. Near the edge was a low square plot surrounded by rotting wood stakes and overgrown brush. That was the section marked in red ink on my map. Opium graves. Supposedly, a place where shame and trade secrets were buried together. I crouched to take a photo of the oldest marker and froze. The air smelled of smoke, not campfire, not cigarettes. It was sweet and sickly, heavy like incense burned too long. I turned slowly, expecting to see someone lighting up in the woods, but no one was there. That night, I set up camp in a flat spot 100 yards away. I didn't plan to stay more than 2 days. Just enough time to photograph the graves and draft my apology. Rain was in the forecast, but I'd brought a tarp and waterproof gear. The forest was quiet as I zipped into my tent. Too quiet. Somewhere past midnight, I saw it, through the mesh flap, a flicker of orange in the direction of the cemetery, like a lantern flame, small and pulsing, weaving between the stones. It moved too smoothly for firelight. I held my breath and watched until it faded back into the fog. The next morning, I went back to the graves, and that's when I saw the carvings. Tiny knife marks etched into the stone faces, patterns shaped like tangled roots, curling in on themselves. I couldn't tell if they were old or new. I reached out to touch one, and a chill crawled up my arm. Not just the cold of stone, something else, as if the carving itself hummed with leftover breath. Later that day, I was walking along the outer row of graves when I heard it. A breath, then a whisper, barely louder than the wind. Smoke, pay. I turned fast, heart pounding, but there was no one there. Just the trees swaying in the distance. I tried to convince myself I'd imagined it. Maybe it was wind through the branches. Maybe it was just nerves. That afternoon, the rain came hard. Water filled the trails in minutes. turning them into muddy trenches. I slipped twice, trying to climb back to the tent. By nightfall, I was soaked, cold, and trapped in a basin of wet stone and tangled undergrowth. I didn't sleep much. When I did, I dreamt of someone sitting cross-legged on the grave mound, smoking something wrapped in yellowed paper. The smoke twisted around my throat in the dream. I woke choking on nothing, the taste of burnt sugar clinging to the back of my tongue. I stayed up after that, just watching the trees. Then, close to dawn, I saw him, a figure, sitting among the gravestones like he belonged there, cloaked in gray, head bowed low, in his hand, a cigarette. No, not quite. Something older, longer, wrapped like a roll of dried leaves. The smoke curled upward in slow spirals. I stepped forward, not thinking, just drawn to the shape. The closer I got, the colder the air turned. My boots squelched in the mud, but I kept moving, 10 feet away. Then 5. He turned. His face was pale, drained of color, but his eyes burned red like coals in a dying fire. He didn't speak. He only breathed in, the tip of his smoke glowing deep red, and then exhaled. The smoke surged outward, fast, too fast. It spun around me like a snake, pressing close to my skin, cold and hot all at once. I couldn't breathe. I staggered back. The smoke followed. I turned and ran. The cemetery tilted beneath my feet, graves warping in the corners of my vision as the smoke clung to my shoulders. My boots slipped on the wet roots, and I tumbled hard onto my knees, scraping them raw. But I pushed myself up and kept going, weaving through the crooked stones with no real direction. Branches whipped across my arms. Rain slicked my hair to my neck. Somewhere behind me, I could still smell it. That awful sweet smoke, thick and wrong, curling through the trees like it knew my name. My lungs burned and my legs felt hollow. I didn't stop until the graves were behind me and the forest pressed in close. In the dark, I nearly missed it, a wide stone slab, half covered by moss. Tucked against a hillside, I crawled underneath the ledge where the rock met the earth and curled in on myself, hoping the rain would drown out the sound of my breath. The storm eased slowly. The trees above rustled with wind, and, every now and then, I thought I heard footsteps slipping through wet leaves. But nothing came. For a long time, it was just me, the stone, and the rising damp in my bones. Eventually I sat up. My hands shook as I pulled out my camera. I thought if I could just see where I was, figure out my bearings, I could plan a path out. But the moment I turned the screen on, I felt it again, the air shifting behind me. That smell. Clothes. I turned slowly. He was there. The man in gray, closer now, his head tilted, smoke trailing from the long roll pinched between his fingers. He did not blink. His arm raised toward me, the smoke swirling out in slow circles, tightening. I scrambled to my feet and ran. The ground was slick, my boots catching on every root and stone. I stumbled, and this time when I fell, I landed hard on something soft and tangled, a coil of root, thick as a rope, wrapped tight around my ankle. I kicked wildly. Mud sprayed. The root held. I looked up, and he was already on me. His hand came down fast. I felt the weight press into my chest, cold as river stone. His face leaned close, and the smoke poured from his mouth, thick and choking. My lungs clenched. I gagged, eyes watering. The scent filled my nose, sweet and burning. I twisted, raked my nails across his arm. His skin felt dry, too thin, like paper soaked in ash. He flinched, just enough. I shoved hard with both arms, rolled free, and crawled toward the trees. My chest burned. My legs barely worked, but I moved. I ran until I could not hear the breath, until the smell faded back into the woods. By the time I reached my tent, Dawn was breaking. Pale light filtered through the wet trees. I didn't stop to pack. I left everything. Just took the camera and ran. It took most of the day to hike out. When I got back to town, my hands were still shaking. My first thought was to review the camera, to see if I'd imagined him, but I couldn't bring myself to press play. Weeks passed. I tried to write about it. I tried to explain what happened in my report, but something changed. My article about my ancestor was pulled from publication. The editor said there were legal concerns, but it felt like something else. Pressure from someone higher up. No one in the valley answered my calls. And at night, sometimes, I still smell it. The sweet smoke, faint but sharp, hovering just at the edge of my bed. I sneeze. I gag. I check every corner. But I never go back. Not to that cemetery. Not to that forest. The smoke still finds me sometimes. And when it does, I feel like he is near. Just waiting. Watching. Holding his breath,